Justice Allison Riggs, welcome to Lunch Break.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me here on Lunch Break.
Absolutely. First question we always ask is, what did you order? What is your go-to cookout order?
Banana milkshake, always. I've tried different ones and I always come back. And I'm a big fan of the corn dogs.
Amazing. I went with a Heath bar and then got a little bit of a funky order. I think I got chicken nuggets and a quesadilla, which is not what I ordered, but we'll love it just the same.
It's the brilliance of cookout.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you're on. It feels like a big deal to have you in this seat. I'm going to fangirl a little bit. I'm going to try my best not to. But for those that don't know you or aren't as familiar, tell us who you are, what you do, and kind of your background.
Yeah, well, I have been on the North Carolina Supreme Court now for 2.5 years. I was appointed in 2023, and so I serve as an associate justice on the North Carolina Supreme Court. I'm the junior justice of 7, so I have a few extra responsibilities because of that. I was a civil rights attorney practicing all across the South, and got into some conversations about what it meant to have more diverse people serving on the bench. So younger women, former civil rights attorneys, and Governor Cooper appointed me to the Court of Appeals first. So I served there for the better part of a year, and then he trusted me with a promotion, and so I joined the Supreme Court.
Not only did you join the Supreme Court, you are the youngest woman to be on the Supreme Court.
Yes, I am the only millennial on the court, and
goodness.
I can tell sometimes. But it was a great honor. I think particularly as women in the law and women professionally, just generally, we're socialized to think that we have to check some boxes personally before we can take on leadership roles and challenges like serving and running statewide. So I'm very cognizant that a lot of women take themselves out of the running for leadership roles and places where their voice really matters. And so to be able to stand up proudly and say, I am the youngest woman to ever serve, I'm the only woman of childbearing age serving on either of our appellate courts at a time where our voices are needed at the tables where decisions are being made. It was a great honor, and I hope it's something that other women look at and want to also jump in.
Absolutely. And that feels like such an honor, and I'm sure also a lot of pressure with that as well. I mean, I'm 26, so to be able to look at someone who is of childbearing age that is representing me is huge. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's hard, right? I think all throughout my career, I argued my first case in the United States Supreme Court 9 years out of law school. And I had plenty of people telling me, like, wait your turn, next time. Like, that's something I heard a lot throughout my career. And so, yeah, it was, I don't believe in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like hearing what your turn is something that women can relate to, whether it's in politics, whether it's in any leadership roles, in school, in anything. And I feel like you've got to disregard that because you would not be where you are today if you went and waited your turn.
Yeah.
In terms of this promotion that you had, you were there for 9 months for in the state Supreme Court. What do you think really stood out? Why you? What did that look like?
So when I talked to Governor Cooper about my appointment to the Court of Appeals, it was just at a moment where we thought we needed to do something differently as part of judicial campaigns, and we needed to talk to voters. And this is a, non-political C3 space, so it's just about recognizing, I think, for your listeners, that being on the bench, doing the judge part of the job is only part of it. We're elected officials and constitutional officers, and it should be part of our job to go out and talk to people about the courts, about what they should expect from their judges, and help them understand how the judiciary can work for them or against them. So part of why I think Governor Cooper gave me a chance was I dove head in to this idea that you can talk to folks in every community, in any kind of setting, not just lawyers, because historically, judges had sort of campaigned mostly to other lawyers instead of realizing that's a very small percentage of the state.
Yeah.
And then I had worked at the Court of Appeals. There's a 15-member bench, and they sit in panels of 3. But I was really proud of my time on the Court of Appeals that I was able to build bridges and win, votes across party lines for what I believed was the right answer in terms of the law. And so even though I wasn't there very long, I was very proud of some of the cases that I wrote the opinions for, and I think sent a good message of what it looks like when your judges check their politics at the door and just look to work and build consensus on
I think
the
we need
bench.
that in general. I
Yes.
think, if we had politics that worked for North Carolina families and North Carolinians, that is regardless of political lines, it's the benefit of everyone in communities. So I appreciate that sentiment. And it's a great segue into setting expectations and being clear about the judiciary branch. I feel like a lot of people, we learned about it when we were in school. And now in real life, I think there's a little bit of confusion about what the judiciary branch looks like in its function in reality. Can you talk to me about your job on the state Supreme Court, how it differs from other courts,
Yeah.
and what to expect from that role?
We have so much work to do, I think, on civics education to help
Yeah.
people understand what different courts do.
Yes.
That's what's going to make folks best able to cast an informed vote. So there's federal courts and there's state courts. And so I think a lot of people, when they hear about the Supreme Court, they may think the U.S. Supreme Court. And obviously that's the highest court in the land, very important. But most of the work gets done in state courts.
Okay.
So within our state court system, our highest court within the state is the North Carolina Supreme Court. There are 7 of us serving on that court. We have an intermediate appellate court. It was created not all that long ago because the workload was just so great. There are 15 members on that court. They sit in Raleigh, just across the street from where we are now. They hear cases from every part of the state, from Murphy to Manteo. They sit on panels of 3.
Okay.
And about 90% of the cases that are on appeal in North Carolina get resolved with finality at the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
So my court, the Supreme Court, only does a small fraction of the appellate work, but then we have our trial courts.
Okay.
So we have district and superior courts. I think most people, when they think of a judge in a courtroom, are picturing a trial court because it tends to be what you see on TV more.
Yes.
Like the Law and Order, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
There's a single judge up there. He or she is, when someone says objection, they're ruling on that objection there. There's witnesses being called. Our trial courts are the ones who are at the front lines. So they hear the testimony, they take the evidence, and they decide the facts because they can see, judge a person's credibility.
Yeah.
On the appellate court, we are not reweighing the facts or redeciding the facts. We are doing something a little bit more straightforward. We're taking the facts and just working on applying the law to them in the best way possible. So it's a little bit more slower paced, a little bit more of an intellectual exercise. But then when we issue rulings, those inform trial court judges all across the state going forward. Like, this is the kind of evidence I should or should not admit, or this is a motion I should or should not grant.
Yeah.
So there's a feedback loop cycle. We get cases, we start to see where there might be some confusion or lack of clarity, and then we try and clear it up so that trial courts can run more smoothly, make sure that people get justice in a prompt and effective way.
It's crucial.
And so it's a really intellectually fascinating job, and it's really important because our court is considering every possible legal issue you could imagine, except for bankruptcy and immigration. Those are federal issues.
Okay.
But anything else, whether you're talking about a criminal conviction, and it can be for something as small as a traffic ticket to murder, if someone is injured on the workplace,
Yeah.
we hear matters about that, environmental pollution, just the entire gamut. So we get to make a lot of decisions that impact North Carolinians' daily lives, and it's really exciting to be able to help tell more people about why this branch is so important.
Absolutely. And you said that there are 7 members of the North Carolina State Supreme Court. You're the only millennial. Can you break down those dynamics a little bit more? Is the Supreme Court something that you have a D or an R next to your name, or is party affiliation not talked about?
Yeah, so um, it's relatively recent. We had partisan elections a long time ago.
Hmm.
There were some reforms in the 1990s, I believe, that made judicial elections nonpartisan. So there was no D or R after your name. And then more recently, in the 2010s, the Republican majority decided that these elections should be partisan.
Okay.
So now we do have D's or R's behind our name, and we run on as partisans with that association. So there are 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats on the North
Okay.
Carolina Supreme Court right now. Um, Obviously, we're not supposed to bring our politics into the conference room.
Absolutely.
But when you run as a Democrat and Republican, I think one of the things that we as a state have to grapple with is there are certain expectations then or perceptions.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's up to the legislature and sometimes it'll be up to the voters if there's a ballot initiative,
Hmm.
a ballot item for them to vote on. And we have the power to decide as a state whether this is the right way to be electing judges or not.
Yeah. It's really important to know that voters have a voice and a choice in that. You were appointed, or all members of the Supreme Court appointed. What does that process look like?
No, it's so my colleague Justice Anita Earls, who's
Hmm.
just down the hallway, she was first elected in the 2018 election. So
Hmm.
she went straight from practice to being elected. Um, Appointments are not uncommon. When there's a vacancy, the governor appoints someone to fill that vacancy, and then they have to stand for the next election.
Okay.
So voters can decide if that is actually someone they want serving them in that role. So initially, I was running to keep my seat on the Court of Appeals. About halfway through the election cycle, I moved to running to keep my seat on the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But no, I think right now I might be the only one who is appointed, but it's not uncommon. And truthfully, you're never just sitting there as an appointed judge for more than essentially 2 years
Yeah.
because you have to go in front of the voters and make your case about why you should keep the job.
I think that's important. The ability to have voters decide, and I think also the education around what your job looks like. And so my next question for you is, what does a day in the life look like for you?
Yeah, it's one of the things I love about this job is that there aren't a lot of typical
Hmm.
days to. I like that things change.
Yeah.
When we have oral argument, so we're on the 2nd floor in the North Carolina Supreme Court. Our courtroom is on the 3rd floor.
Mm.
When we have oral argument, it's usually in 2-week sittings.
Mm.
So those days are long days physically here in the courtroom. We're hearing oral argument. Each oral argument is about an hour.
Okay.
We generally hear about 20 cases in a 2-week period.
Wow.
So it's a lot of prep work for those sittings. We had a sitting just last week. And so those days tend to be a little bit more typical. I live in Chatham County, so I have to drive into Raleigh, and to beat traffic, I have to hit the road pretty early.
Yeah.
And they're long days, but they're really exciting. I was a former litigator and a former appellate attorney, so I stood at that podium on the other side a lot before
Wow.
joining the bench, and so it's really a highlight of the job to be able to do that. But before we get to oral argument, the parties have submitted hundreds and hundreds of pages of briefing for us to
Wow.
consider. And luckily, I both love reading and I'm a fast reader.
Thank goodness.
Otherwise, it's a lot to get through. After an oral argument cycle, so you read all the briefs, you consider all the arguments. If you have questions, you ask the attorneys when you have them in front of you. And then we go back and we do a lot of writing. And that's slow, and it's supposed to be because
Yeah.
we want to get it right. It's not about getting it fast, it's about getting it right. So it's very iterative. I have 3 clerks who work in my chamber, so I work very closely with them. And then anything I write, I have to get my colleagues, or at least 3 of them, to agree with what I want to write. I write a fair number of unanimous opinions, though. About half of our opinions are unanimous. And then sometimes there's a little slowdown in between that cycle.
Yeah.
And I try, and whenever I can, try and visit law schools, visit colleges, visit civic groups. I like to, whenever I can, go worship in people's churches on Sundays with them. Just anywhere I can be out in community, I
Yeah.
consider to be part of the job, because this is the people's seat. And I sit in it and do this work at their pleasure, and I want them to feel a sense of engagement with what I do.
Absolutely. I feel like anyone that is in public office, it is because you care about the state of North Carolina. And I'm sure it gives you the ability to fill your cup in that way, to see the contrast of being in the community versus the long days. I feel like that it's always great for me to get the different perspectives and hear the needs of North Carolinians, because I feel like that differs depending on the season that we're in, the county that we're in, the needs in the moment. So I appreciate your accessibility. I mean, that is something that you and I met at an event years ago. And I feel like when you hear, Supreme Court judge, you often think they're behind this large tower. And I thought, there's no way. This is amazing because you are so accessible.
I used to, I sometimes explain, most people have seen The Wizard of Oz. I don't
Yes.
think it serves the interest of justice for judges to be seen as the Wizard of Oz, behind the curtains, and no one
Yeah.
understands what they're doing or how they're approaching their work. And then, you end up in a situation where it's a grouchy old man and,
Yeah.
he's portraying himself as the, almighty, powerful Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
I think we should pull the curtains back to the extent we can. Some of our processes are confidential, and our
Absolutely.
deliberations are entirely confidential. So there are things that are not appropriate for me to talk about, but everything that is, I think, should be, because I want people to understand how our justice system works, and have the information they need to cast informed ballots.
Visibility is important. I think whether it's the Supreme Court, the legislature, the governor's mansion, having this kind of Wizard of Oz mentality is daunting, especially for young people. And so I just appreciate you taking the time and the effort. I think that's, really big. So we're sitting here in Raleigh in your office, and I cannot stop staring at this one photo on your wall. Can you walk me through that photo a little bit and the importance of it?
Yeah, so that is a painting from my first argument in front of the United States Supreme Court. There are no videos or photographs allowed in the Supreme Court chambers during oral arguments, so they have an artist who sketches, and then if you pay him, paints a picture of it. It's pretty expensive, but it's a really special experience as an attorney. So that was in a Texas gerrymandering case that I argued in 2018. It's a case that I'd been litigating, I think, since 2010, 2011. I'd been involved in it for a long time. That was the second time it had gotten up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And so that was a little bit of my souvenir from that time. I didn't get my second time in the arguing in the U.S. Supreme Court was the next year. I couldn't justify buying another painting from that, but that was when I argued the North Carolina partisan gerrymandering case. But yeah, it was really a wonderful experience as an attorney. I was very lucky that my clients had a lot of faith in me,
Yeah.
and I like to, it's a special thing to have in my office.
Absolutely. I mean, as soon as I walked in, I thought this is a moment. And I feel like, especially as women in leadership roles, it's important to recognize those wins that we have. So I just wanted to make sure I asked you about it because it's awesome to see. We're going to talk about some more of your wins.
Okay.
I feel like that is a big thing that we should do because you've done such a great job. So I wanted to see if you could talk to me about some of your highlights in your career, not only on the state Supreme Court, but just in general.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed my work before joining the bench. So I was an attorney with a kind of an unusual practice. I was in a small civil rights firm, one founded, oddly enough, by Justice Anita Earls, who is now again my colleague here on this court. But I was a trial attorney and an appellate attorney. Sometimes you tend to take one path or the other. And most of the moments that I treasured the most were getting to put a client on the stand and let him or her tell their story and share with the decision maker, usually the judge, about what was affecting them. And I did a variety of different kinds of law. Towards the end, it was mostly voting rights law, but I did environmental justice work, employment law, pretty much a broad range of civil kinds of cases. So as a trial attorney, I really liked that. And trials are fun. You do it can look like TV. You have to jump to your feet and object. Otherwise, you might waive the argument. But as an appellate attorney, I think, in addition to my times in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, I was really honored in 2016 to argue in front of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. So it's the big federal appeals court that's sort of a stepping stone to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's based out of Richmond, but covers North Carolina.
Yeah.
And I argued the voter suppression case where that court said that North Carolina had passed a law that targeted Black voters with surgical precision in an attempt to keep them from voting. And it was just a really fantastic opportunity. The courtroom was packed full of clients and directly affected voters and groups, and the judges got it. And part of why I ultimately felt called to join the bench when I did, and at all, was I had the experience of appearing in front of judges who I felt like had probably made their mind up before I'd even walked into the courtroom. And I'd had clients say to me after an argument or a case, that judge already, he wasn't listening to you at all. He was already knew what he was going to do. And that is really damaging to people's faith in the justice system. And so to be able to be a part of fixing that, of being curious and being committed to being undecided and being willing to listen to every side and consider all of the arguments, it just feels like I'm playing a part in fixing a problem that I had seen and felt. And so it felt like something I was being called to do.
Absolutely. We've been doing a lot of work. Influence NC has been doing a lot of work with students at A&T around their polling places. And so I appreciate the work that you've done. It also just feels like it's hit home so often because we're seeing similar things happen. So just thank you.
Well, it was a great honor. And now that I'm on the bench, I think some of the things I thought would be rewarding are I get to see attorneys stand up and sometimes they'll say, "This is my first time arguing in front of this court. Thank you for that opportunity." And that's so encouraging to me because I want to see people reaching for that opportunity, and I want to hear different voices representing clients from across the state because I was in their shoes not that long ago. So it is really rewarding, and I'm a recovering litigator. I like to persuade people.
Yeah.
And even though I'm a judge, I'm part of a group that decides we make group decisions.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to be effective, I have to be able to persuade my colleagues. And so I I get to use those skills. I'm not an advocate anymore, but I didn't leave those skills and those,
Yeah.
talents and the enjoyment I get from that. I didn't leave it at the courtroom door. I get to use it with my colleagues now.
So fun. It's such a new way to kind of mold those same skills just in a very different way.
Right.
One of the biggest Supreme Court cases that I feel like is known to people in North Carolina is Leandro. It is always a topic of conversation. I think when we talk about that civic education in the judicial branch, that is the topic that comes to mind. How do you think the handling of Leandro has impacted the public's opinion on the judicial branch and kind of the process?
Well, so I'm grateful for this opportunity to sort of explain what some of the limits are on judges. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot I can say about the Leandro case because it is still pending before our court. We heard oral arguments in that case in February of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we just hit the 2-year mark, but we haven't issued a decision yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so judges in this state can't talk about cases that haven't been
That are
decided yet.
active. Yeah.
I can tell folks the facts, what's
Mhm.
available, like tell them about the facts and what's available publicly, which is that I signed on to a dissent back in 2023 saying I didn't think we should take the case up again. This court had issued a ruling in 2022. And when we took this case up again, Justice Earls penned a very powerful dissent saying that taking it up again was just an invitation. So this all facts. It's in the dissent.
Yeah.
I can even give you a copy of it to
We can
take
have
with
it.
that it was an invitation to treat our opinions as fleeting and changing with the political composition of the court.
Yeah.
So beyond that, we're still considering, still deciding. The court will at some point rule in it, but I think what I encourage folks to learn about is the Constitution itself.
Yeah.
And what the history of that case is, that, it's been going on for 30 years. There are 4 times prior to this last one that it's come up to the North Carolina Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a history of the North Carolina Supreme Court interpreting our state constitution to provide a sound promise and guarantee a sound basic public education to all North Carolinian children.
Mm-hmm.
Our federal constitution doesn't have anything like that.
Yeah.
So our state constitution has parts of it that are really cool, that create rights that for us that we don't enjoy as U.S. citizens, but we do as North Carolina citizens. And so however folks come to learning about our courts or learning about our state constitution, whether it's through public school funding or redistricting cases or criminal cases, I want them to understand that our job on the North Carolina Supreme Court is to be the final say on what the North Carolina Constitution means. Mm-hmm. And we don't always have a U.S. Supreme Court case on point to say, oh, well, we're kind of going to do what they're going to do. We have to interpret our Constitution on its own, and we have a lot of power to decide on not only the rights and freedoms that all of us enjoy as North Carolinians, but how the different branches of government interact with each other to create a robust system of checks and balances so that you can make sure that your government is always working for you.
Yeah. And this seems like a basic thing to say, but I think that's a really good segue to also saying that every state has their own constitution, as well as the federal U.S. Constitution. And I am not originally from North Carolina, but moved here for college and have stayed and have loved and adored every minute of it. But I think it's a good plug for those that are moving to North Carolina or have been here for a small period of time, or if you've never looked at the state constitution, you've lived here your whole life. Do some digging.
Well, I can also tell you I have a pocket constitution.
Do you?
That I keep in my purse at all times. So it's a great read. Maybe it's a nerdy read, but it's a great read.
It's an important read as well.
It is. And I think understanding that variety amongst states is great for learning about how we can do things better. So every state has a different constitution. We have some that like the Tennessee Constitution is modeled heavily on the North Carolina Constitution.
Oh.
So they actually look a lot to our decisions because our
Wow.
Constitution was the basis for theirs. But most there's a great variety in how judges are elected or appointed to state courts. So just don't assume in the way that it was done in the state you were born in or the state you grew up in is
Yeah.
the way we do it here, and they're subject to change. The way in which judicial elections are run in this state have changed a lot over the last 20 years.
It's a really good perspective of how each state can handle things so differently based on that alone. So thank you for that clarification. So your last campaign made national news for a lot of reasons. Let's say for a North Carolinian that moved here yesterday, how would you explain your campaign and that dynamic?
Yeah, so I had a long campaign. I campaigned for the full 2-year election cycle, and then my race was very close, as is pretty typical for statewide elections in North Carolina and certainly judicial elections. But because that race was so close, my win, and I won by 734 votes out of over 5.5 million votes cast. So when I say those numbers a lot because I want voters to hear what that means. It means every single vote counts. We know that tens of thousands of voters, maybe not millions, but tens of thousands of voters don't vote the full ballot.
Yes.
They might vote for the president and the governor and just turn in their ballot then.
Yeah.
So voters who do that are giving up the opportunity to be the deciding votes in really important elections. But because my election was so close, there was some dispute post-election, and it took 6 months and 3 days for my opponent to concede, and mine was the last race from the entire 2024 election cycle to be certified. And so that was in May 2025. So I essentially had a 2.5-year campaign instead of a 2-year campaign, which was a long time to be doing that.
And when you say the last race, you mean the last race out of the entire United States?
The entire country.
As someone who looked at a lot of cases about voting and voting rights, this feels like a horribly ironic situation.
Yeah, there were days when I think, it's like, am I being punked? I'm a former voting rights attorney, and I am involved in arguably the most high-profile election case of the 24 cycle. So it felt like someone had a sense of humor about that.
A sick and twisted one.
Not a good one. That's right. But, it was part of the reason why I think I was there in that moment for a reason and felt very equipped to handle what was a stressful situation.
Yeah.
And, at core, it was an honor and a privilege to fight to ensure that every eligible North Carolina voter had their lawful ballot counted. And would I have preferred it happened a little more quickly? Sure. But at the end of the day, as frustrating as it might have been at any given moment, it ended up being a really affirming, encouraging experience because I never felt like I was alone. I never felt like people were like, I'm done with this, I'm moving on. People were with me that whole 6 months and 3 days, not that I was counting.
How validating and comforting. Because I feel like unless you've worked on a campaign or been the one that's running, it is a different mindset. It takes a lot out of your person and your soul, and just your families, I feel like, take a toll. It takes a lot of you and the people around you. So to have to do that for an extra 6 months, I'm sure it was, as much as it was hard, so validating to know that there were people backing you.
Yeah, I imagine I was, a first-time candidate. This was my first cycle, but I'm sure it's a common thing that you feel guilty about the stress and the burden it puts on your loved ones and your family and your friends, because I signed up to do this. They signed up to love me and support me, but
Yeah.
didn't necessarily sign up to do all of that. So obviously, yeah, I had, there were times when I felt guilty and worried about the burden I was creating on people around
Yeah.
me, but they are also the source of my joy and
Yes.
my convictions and my grit and my determination. And
Absolutely.
so, it's a team effort. No one does this work alone.
No, you can't. The fact that that was your first election as well is a time, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness. One, I think as women, we have to be an extra level of self-aware about how our actions impact others. It's a conversation I've had with my friends and family and significant others of being in the political world. It's a very different world. There's not an on and off switch. There's a lot that comes with it. And so during that time and now, I'm sure equally as stressful, how do you find joy in it all? What were the things that really had you, smiling on the campaign and then today?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes when things are fast paced,
Hmm.
your old tools of coping and refreshing may not be available to you because of time and location. So it was about finding the little things. I got very into dog clips, dog videos on YouTube.
I
So
love it.
we Rate Dogs was just it was 2 or 3 minute clips, the best 10 dogs of the week. And sometimes I had a few minutes, in the middle of the night, and that just made me happy. It wasn't political, it wasn't legal, it wasn't anything other than
Yes.
the internet collaborating to find the cutest dogs.
Yes. I think it's a really good plug too of oftentimes your joy should be outside of politics and should be outside of your job
You know,
because you need to be able to remove and reframe and come back in with that energy. And I feel like burnout is a thing in politics.
for sure. And my husband, don't want anyone to think he wasn't critical to me getting through that. He was, but yeah, I mean, we definitely had dinners where we were like, we're not talking about anything that's
Yes.
happening outside of this. We have 12 nieces and nephews, and so in the heat of all of that, I didn't get to spend as much time with them as I would like,
Yeah.
but still hearing about how their days are going and their sports and their school, and
Yeah.
remembering that there's a world outside of all of this and that we can't
Yes.
forget to tend to those parts of our lives
Yeah.
too. And I have a very ornery rescue dog named Goose, so I think
Oh.
sometimes caring for someone, something other than yourself is very
Yes.
healing. It connects you to nature. It shores up the parts of you that are loving and altruistic and optimistic.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
I have a mini wiener dog named Winston, so I get that.
I
He
love it.
is just such a joy. But I think that's such a plug for whether it's someone running for office, working in politics, or just consuming so much of the political media right now to be, really strong in your boundaries of, okay, there's a date we're going to go on where we're not going to talk about politics. I have to do that because my boyfriend is not involved politically at all. And I think that that's amazing because it allows me to kind of, sit back. But I'll have to have those days where I'm like, okay, we're not going to talk about it. And it's for, I think, the best of everybody in our mental health.
We have to. This work of making a better state and making a better country. It is long-term work,
Yes.
and the arc of the universe bends towards justice,
Hmm.
bends slowly sometimes, and
Yeah.
so you have to find those things outside of your work or your, politics. You have to find those things that fill you up.
Yeah.
I wish I could get exercise to be more of one of those, but not yet. We'll figure
Yeah,
that out.
absolutely. Question for you, or I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you is if you have any advice for the girls that are in law school today, the young people that are in law school that are looking at you, what are things that you wish you knew then or advice you have for them today?
So I had a really neat opportunity in 2024 to give the commencement speech at my law school.
Oh my
So it
gosh.
was, At that point, I was 15 years out of law school, so I was pretty young for a person doing that.
Yes.
And I thought a lot about what I wanted to say to them because I was sitting where they were not that long ago, and what have I learned in my journey? And what I told them, and still it rings true for me, is um, don't let other people tell you when you can start making a difference or when you can be important or when your voice matters. Especially in the law, people think, well, I have to make partner before I can, do anything outside of just grind for those billable hours, or I have to have my family built and settled before I can turn and think about what changing up my legal practice. And
Yeah.
um, my message to them was, your voice matters now. It doesn't matter where you are in your journey. You have an experience that's both unique to you and probably representative of a lot of people who may also feel quiet,
Yeah.
or quieted. And so every time that you have an opportunity to speak up and speak out for what's right or for what you want our system to look like, do it now. Don't wait. Life is too short to wait, and we have missed out, I think, on too many opportunities to learn from the folks coming behind us. And part of my commitment, and I think yours too, given what you're doing, is we want those voices in the dialogue. And so, as an elected leader and woman, I'm always cognizant that I have an opportunity to pause, turn around, and hold my hand out to the woman or the person coming behind me, to make it a little easier for them, to make them feel a little less scared, a little less alone. And then I ensure that I'm not alone,
Yeah.
that people with really valuable perspectives to add are then in the mix. And so both, I have to encourage people to speak and be heard, and then I have to listen when
Yeah.
they do.
Listening is a huge part of it. And I'm sure you saw me tearing up as you were saying that. As someone who, we started Influence NC in October for a similar reason. You're told, wait your time, there will come a day. And there was this gap of, I think there's things we can do today. There's lived experiences that so many people have that I think we can harness and use to make a better North Carolina. So thank you for saying that. It's definitely hitting home. So I really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate the opportunity to talk about our courts and why they matter, and to give people a glimpse into what my job looks like, because it matters that folks hold us accountable, that they think about the ways in which every part of our government can serve the people of this state. And I learn a lot from just listening to people from wherever they are, wherever they're showing up. And I think you do an important service.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being on lunch break.